All right, good afternoon, everyone. So welcome to our UMC-STIC Distinguished Lecture Series in Translation Studies. This is our first lecture in the academic year of 2022 and 2023. So for those who are not familiar with the acronym, CSTIC stands for Center for Studies of Translation, Interpreting, and Cognition. So this lecture is our very first lecture in this academic year. So it is also, held today to celebrate the 2022 International Translation Day. So a quiz. Do you guys know when is the International Translation Day? Is it today? Is it today? Nobody knows. So that's why we need to have this celebration. So we are all here, learning to be translators, interpreters, or rather, more broadly, language service professionals, right, in the future. So I think we should know when is our sort of day, right? So it's not today. It's about 2 days later on September 30th. That's our International Day of, International Translation Day, the International Day of Translation. So we are very, very happy to have this opportunity to celebrate this day, to really, enhance our awareness of this important day and also our profession. And I think some of you might have checked out, the International Day Translation Day online. Have you noticed the theme for this year? It is a world without barriers, right? So that's what we do, right? We do translation, we do interpreting, we do subtitling. So we are sort of helping to construct a world without barriers, right? We can't really make a country or make a world without borders, but I think we can help to, make a world without barriers. So we're really very honored today to have Professor Jing speak to us on translation in general and probably subtitling in particular. I've actually sent the sort of a bio sketch of Professor Han to all of you before our lecture today. So sort of just to summarize, to sort of emphasize, the importance of our occasion, I would say a few words about Professor Han. I think Professor Han, first of all, comes with many, quite a few titles. She's, first of all, Chair Professor of Translation Studies at Western Sydney University. She's at the School of Humanities and Communication Arts. She's also the director, and even more important position, I think, director of the Institute for Australia and Chinese Arts and Culture. And I think you all know that she's also the chief subtitler and also head of the SBS subtitling department. So SBS is one of the major, broadcasting stations in Australia. So she comes with a number of titles, and I think she's actually, as far as I see, one of the a small number of translation academics who have most impressive practical translation experiences. So it's actually easy to find translation scholars with lots of research experience, but it's really, we don't have that many, at least in my view, in the around that who have a experience in both theory and also really lots of practical translation experiences. So if we just cite two numbers, we know that she comes with over 20 years of practical experience, and of course that comes with expertise in translation as well. And she has translated over 300 films, right? That's, really amazing. I think it's a number that many of us probably aspire to do, but may never be able to really, reach that goal. But anyway, so besides that, she translates from English into Chinese and vice versa, right? She translated films, movies. She also translated literary works, again, in both directions. So she's really have a really impressive record of translation practice and also theory building. So, right. And I think that, as we can see, that she really devotes herself to the communication of Chinese culture to the outside world, and even really promote the mutual understanding between Australia and China. So she's really one of the best persons to speak on, communication and translation. So, that's exactly what her topic is about, right? Achieving communication via translation. So I think I've taken up a little bit too much of your time. So without further ado, I would like to turn the floor to Professor Han, and then, let's give Professor Han a big welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Lee, for your very kind and generous introduction. Yes, so true. This International Day for Translation, the theme is, without barrier. So translation is all about to break down the barrier between languages and cultures. So it's quite fascinating. And the fact that I've been doing translation and interpreting and subtitling and literary translation for so many years after I actually graduated, got my PhD in English literature. It's purely because it's just fascinating. It is something I don't know. I don't envy any other people's profession. I just think this is the right profession. It is very intriguing and very fascinating and stimulating every single day. It just makes you so aware of things around you all the time. When you hear things, when you read things, when you see things, it just you become so stimulated after you become a translator. You become aware of things that you were not aware before. So today, I hope at the end of the lecture, you will feel the same. So you will think like translation. It's not as simple as many people assumed. Okay, let me share the screen, and I suppose at the end of lecture, you can ask questions, so you can save your questions while you are listening to it. I don't, because there is a copyright, because there are a lot of screenshots that I used, so there is a copyright issue, so you can't record, but you can take pictures, that's all fine. So today's the topic is achieving communication in translation, and you will realize why I emphasize communication. I mean, isn't translation is a translation? No, translation is not a translation, and communication is vital. I always use this one as my holding slide because it's vital. If you do translation, you do need to understand the fundamental elements about translation. This is said by Lawrence Venuti. He is the guru of translation studies at the beginning. Anyone who studies the translation studies have to read Lawrence Venuti. Many people oversimplified his works. Actually, he has a lot of subtle sayings about translation. So just people often misinterpreted his books or his theories in the black white. That's not true. This is what he said. Basically, he was saying the purpose of a translation is where the translation text is where a different culture emerges. So when you translate, you should show a different culture. So you should not show the same culture, not domesticated so much that people don't recognize it. So the translation is a site where a different culture emerges. Be careful of the words that he uses, emerges. And a reader gets a glimpse of the other culture. You can never get a full picture through translation. It's not the same. It doesn't mean it can't be translated. Everything can be translated, but there are limitations. And when there are limitations, that means you need to come up with the creative solutions. So basically, he was saying, when you translate a different culture. You should show a different culture, but also bear in mind, you can never show your audience, target language audience, a full picture. They can only have a glimpse of the other culture. So what is a translation? And people, again, often think in a simplistic way. 3 elements about translation. First of all, translation is a process. It's a negotiation process. Process means it's ongoing. Translation is never product. Even classics, if you're aware, classics, they are being retranslated every 40 or 50 years. Every single classic books. It's because time changes, audiences changes, language changes, people's consciousness changes. So it's always a process. And if you ask me to translate something today, it will be different if I translate it tomorrow or if I translate it 10 years ago. So it's a process. Why it's a negotiation process? When we go to a negotiation table, 2 things you must be aware. Firstly, you cannot have everything. That's why you went to a negotiation table. So you need to be clear what you want. What you want should be the most important thing to you, most relevant to what you want. And then you should also be aware what you can give away. So the least important thing you can give away. So negotiation is very, very important skills, not only in translation, but also in life. You know, in life, we always negotiate. We cannot have everything in life. So the most important thing you do not give away that is most important under the circumstances, and you keep something that is least important. So that's negotiation process. So translation is always thinking under that particular circumstances, what is most important to keep and what is something that you can give away, because you must give away something in order to get the other thing that you want the most. Second element, a translation is a mediation process. What's the difference between negotiation and mediation? Mediation is to resolve conflicts. So we send mediators to war zones to resolve conflicts between the warring parties, warring countries or warring nations. So they are there to resolve conflicts. So translation, same thing. You know, translator needs to resolve linguistic and cultural conflicts. There are conflicts all the time. And this is a skill. Again, this skill is not only applies to translation, but also applies in life, at work. You know, so once you have this skill, it's applicable everywhere. So it's quite interesting. So translation is not just on books or a profession. It's very much a life skill. Last element of translation is the decision-making communication. So in the end, what you translate needs to communicate a message. So if people who read your translation, they don't know what you're trying to get, you defeat the purpose. You failed your job. So translation is not about, oh, I transfer from this language into another language and my job is done. But do your target language get the intended message that you want to tell them? If they don't, then you didn't do your job. So communication is vital in translation. In the end, you have a message to convey. So that comes to decision-making. That tells a lot about subjectivity of translation. Translator needs to make lots of decisions. So you need to make informed decisions. The more options you have, the better you are as a translator, because you understand your source text in a thorough way. So that's why you need to make a decision.
That also tells why some translators are better than others, because better ones, they are good at make sound decisions. They're not just make a decision, they make sound decisions. And you constantly need to make decisions. And each time is a different decisions because they involves a lot of negotiations, it involves a lot of mediation, there are a lot of conflicts. So I will show you down examples later on. So that's about translation. Now, if a translation is all about a communication, and then you need to understand what happens to communication. What is a communication? So how does communication occur? Again, there are a few main elements. Firstly, communication is intentional. Intentional means there is intended message. So my communication to you now is intentional. I have a message or lots of messages conveyed to you. I'm not just talking to the air. I'm not just talking nonsense. I have messages and I have intentions. So it's intentional message, intentional communication. So we're not talking about mad people just talking to the air. We're talking about intentional communication. Second element, it creates expectation in the hearer. So when you are in this lecture and you have been told that today's lecture is about a translation, is about communication. So you are here with expectation of listening to something about translation. You're not here all of a sudden. If I started talking about stock market, and then you would be puzzled. Am I in the wrong room? Is why I don't get it. So there is expectation when communication occurs. Third element, to understand, we need constantly, incessantly interpret utterances. So you are listening to me, you are processing your head. So communication doesn't occur automatically. It's not just because you hear me, you understand me. When you hear me, you interpret in your head what I'm talking about, what I said. So you constantly interpret in your head. That's how you understand. So to understand, you need to interpret what I'm saying. That explains why we misunderstand each other often. You even misunderstand your parents or your parents misunderstand you. That happens all the time because interpreted wrongly for whatever the reason. So communication is not a given. It needs a lot of negotiations and mediations to make it happen in the right way. So we can see in communication involves the two things. One is audience. You have audience, so that's you can do the communication. Second element, you have intended message. It's not just a message, but intended message. That is why you won't misunderstand what I'm saying. So these two things are vital for communication to occur. Now let's look at the audience first. There is a concept called audience design, very vital for communication and actually very vital for translation. And to start with, the translation studies or interpreting studies, they don't have their own theories as such. They always borrow theories from other disciplines, from linguistics, from sociology, from psychology, from communication, from everywhere, from literary criticism. This is where I actually came from. My background is literary criticism. So we borrow a lot of theories from other disciplines. And audience design is a concept first introduced by New Zealand social linguist called Alan Bell. And he wrote this very famous, very influential article called Language Style as Audience Design. You can Google it, and this is the PDF file. It's a very fascinating article. It's very long, but you don't need to understand everything in the first reading. You will go back and read again, and you get new things. So primarily for us, as far as communication and as far as translation are concerned, two important principles you need to understand about the language style as audience design. Firstly, people are primarily responding to other people. So when we speak, we respond. And for example, when I speak to you, I respond to you. So I don't just talk. without responding. And I know that you are translation studies students or teachers who have strong background in translation. So I'm responding to you. And second principle is I design my speech style for my audience. So for example, if now I'm talking to people who do not understand translation, for example, if I talk to my colleagues in other disciplines or talking to my television station, other colleagues who are not doing subtitling, I will use different languages. I will use different speech style because they don't understand the jargons that we use. So two important things, you respond and you design according to the audience you have. Alan Bell categorized the 4 types of audiences, and very important to know who they are. The first type is addressee, like you are in the first category, because I'm talking to you directly. Second one is called auditor, who are present, but not necessarily I'll address them. So for example, I don't, if we, like just now, we run into, for example, if we just run into, if we run into technical problems, and then we got a guy come into this room to fix the computer or technology, and that technology person is in the second category. He is here, but I'm not talking to him. However, his presence will have impact on the way I speak. For example, if we are doing a secret agent training and we are talking about top secrets, and this guy is here, then I won't continue my talking. I will change either subject or I will talk in codes that he doesn't understand. So even if he has nothing to do with us, I need to change my speaking style. Third category is overhearer. They are here, but they are not participants. They are around. For example, in a bus, in a bus, someone sitting behind you, and you ask, someone sitting behind me, does that person's presence have anything to do with the way I speak? Yes. Suppose you are with your best friend and you speak in dialect, Cantonese or Shanghainese or whatever the dialect or Fujian dialect that a few people understand. You are talking to your best friend about the very personal details about your personal life. And then all of a sudden you realize that someone behind you also speaks the Shanghai dialect, the same as you. Then that will have impact on the way you speak, even if that person has nothing to do with you. The last category are the people you do not see, but you are aware. For example, the book, when you write a book, your readers, or when you make a film, your audiences. You do not see them, but you are aware of them. So if you're writing a children's book, you are aware of your children, children as readers, or you're making a film for a certain group of people. So that's the 4 categories. And it is very important for the good communicator, for the speaker, who is a good communicator, who makes sure that a communication happens. He needs to identify first the types of his audience, and then design his utterances accordingly. Failing to do that, there are consequences. And these are the real examples that I have. Again, translation is really about awareness. When you study translation, you just become aware of things that you were not aware before. And this is a typical example. After this lecture, you will become aware of lots of things that you were not aware before the lecture. And this is happened to my colleague, Brendan. Brendan worked with me at the TV station. He's in my team in subtitling. Because we're doing If You're the One, 非诚勿扰, loads of episodes. He does the cut. He do the, because it's 1.5 hours each episode. So we cut down to 60 minutes. So by doing that program, he got so interested. He started studying Chinese. And then he realized that his next door neighbor is a Chinese couple. So sometimes he just went over to practice the Chinese with them. One night, he heard them fighting because they speak very loudly and then speak very fast. You know, when you're fighting, when you quarrel, they literally speak very fast. So he couldn't really understand what they were saying in Chinese. But all of a sudden, he heard the woman said very clearly, said, 不要那么大声讲话，隔壁那个人听得懂中文。
He understood that. So that woman identified her audience. So she didn't go on to say things that she didn't want to say, or she didn't want to be heard by Brandon, because Brandon understood. So that's the example that the person identified correctly her audience. And this happened to me. I don't know any of you have been in Australia. Australia is a very multicultural society. Country is a migration nation, much more so than many European countries, even more so than America, or probably UK as well. So we have all sorts of people from all over the world living in Australia. So one day we were my daughter and I, in a dress shop. So I was looking at the dress, very bright colored. And then I noticed that a roughly 80-year-old Caucasian Western looking lady, she was looking at the same dress. So I conscious that I didn't want her to hear me. So I said in Mandarin to my daughter, I said, 你看那个老太太也看这个裙子. Then my daughter said, 你怎么知道她不说中文? And then the old lady said, in Chinese, 哦，我听得懂你们说的话. She spoke perfect Chinese. It turned out she's white Russian, but she was born and grew up in China for 30 years. So she migrated to Australia very later on. So that example shows that I misidentified my audience. And so I didn't design my utterances accordingly. So I made a mistake. Luckily, I didn't say anything mean because I quickly went through my head. Did I say something mean? Luckily, I didn't, luckily, I'm not a mean person. I could have. So these are the real examples in life. So you need to identify your audience. So translators, like speakers, we said, translation is really to communicate. So to be able to communicate, you need to know your audience, and then you respond to your audience. Knowing audience is not like you know them personally. No, you don't. But you need to know your target language audience through the target language and target language culture. So the more you know, and then the society and the customers and traditions, and then the more you know about your target language audience, so that you can respond to them accordingly, so that they can get your message covered in your translation. So translation, there is another very important theory that has a huge influence in the way that I do my translation. And I love this theory. It's called a relevance theory. Relevance theory is a communication theory. It's a huge theory. You don't need to know everything about it, but there is a certain part which has a lot to do with the translation. So it's basically they are developed by Sperber and Wilson. Sperber is a French anthropologist, and Wilson, she is a British linguist. She's Noam Chomsky's PhD student. So that explains a lot. So the two together, they established relevance theory. Relevance theory is basically talking about human communication. And as I said, communication is vital for translation. If you don't understand communication, you will not be a good translator. So to understand communication, you need to know that according to relevance theory, human communication involves two separate things, which I didn't know until I read about this story. One is expression, and the other is a cognition of intentions. They are separate. That means it's just because you said something and then your attention is understood. That's not true. So they are two parts. You said something, that's expression. People understood what you said. That means cognition of intentions. So they are two separate components
in communication. And cognition of intentions relies on the context. So you need to have the context to interpret intended message. Why? Because all languages are vague and ambiguous, which will come down to that. So basically, cognition of intentions relies on context to interpret the intended message. The reason why I'm telling you, I want you later on to think reversely. So that means when you do the translation, you not only translate the expression, you also need to provide the context to enable your target language audience to interpret the intended message. That's how the theory is applied to practice. So context refers to, you need to have the cognitive environment to help you to interpret what is intended. And I will give you examples afterwards. So when we communicate, basically there are two types of meanings. One is a coded meaning. Coded meaning basically means the input equals the output. So input and output are the same, like traffic lights. Yellow means prepare to stop. Red means stop. And green means to go. So if you see the red, you stop. So that's output and input are the same, equal. However, there is another meaning which happens most of the time, more so than coded meaning, called inferred meaning. Inferred meaning means the hearer, the person who listens to you, uses knowledge other than linguistic expression to work out the intended message. And this is vital for you to understand how translation works. For example, question, have you watched The Big Bang Theory? Answer, I never watched sitcom. So, did he watch Big Bang Theory? No. Why not? So to understand the answer, you need to know actually Big Bang Theory is a sitcom. If Big Bang Theory is a sitcom, and if he never watches sitcom, and then you can draw a conclusion that he never watches the Big Bang Theory. So that's called inferred. So it's not in the linguistic expression, but in your head, you work out, you use knowledge other than linguistic expression. You use the knowledge knowing that the Big Bang Theory is a sitcom. Otherwise, you wouldn't know the answer. So just because you know the linguistic expressions doesn't mean you understand the intended message. So there is always a gap between what is linguistically encoded and what is intended as a message. And typical example, question, 小李喜欢吃辣吗? You translate, do you think Li likes spicy food? Answer, 她是湖南人. You translate, she's from Hunan. So, does she like spicy food or not? For Chinese, probably everyone knows, or probably not everyone, because to understand the answer, you have to understand two types of knowledge that are beyond the linguistic expression. Firstly, where is Hunan? You can't assume everyone outside China knows where Hunan is. I mean, Sichuan knows people, lots of people know, and Beijing, lots of people know, but not Hunan. So Hunan is not that well known to outside people. So you can't assume everyone knows Hunan is. Second point, people need to know, or the person who understands this must know that a Hunan cuisine is actually very spicy. It's spicier than Sichuan food. So you need to have these two sets of knowledge to understand. And then if you reverse it, if you only translate, do you think Li likes spicy food or she's from Hunan? Your English target language audience may not understand because they don't know where Hunan is and they don't know Hunan food is spicy. So you translate what is said. You didn't translate what is meant to the target language audience because according to their cognitive environment, which is different from yours, you know Hunan food, but they don't. So they are not matching. So you need to work out the answer. You need to have a contextual assumption. You understand as a Chinese because you have the contextual assumption. You know Hunan, you know about Hunan food. If you don't, and then you lack the contextual assumptions. So by translating, you need to provide contextual assumptions that you have accessed implicitly and make it explicit to your target language audience. So they have the same cognitive environment that you have to help them interpret the intended message. So human communication is inferential, it's tweely, and utterances are non-literal. No utterance is actually literal. You see, really? That's right. No utterance is literal. And we speak, let alone we speak in an ironical way. This is a typical example, obvious example. What a lovely day, although it's a stormy weather outside. So clearly you don't mean it's a lovely day. You said it in a sarcastic way. So you don't mean what you say. So what is said is not what is meant. And this is more subtle. The commitment is as solid as the American president. Again, if you don't understand, if you don't have the context of this ironical context, you don't understand the irony. You think, oh, okay, that means 这个承诺就和美国总统的话一样坚实不断，就是很坚硬，很坚实。But that's not true, because the American president here referred to Donald Trump. So when the American president referred to Donald Trump, that is ironic. So Donald Trump never make any commitment. He always made loads of those lies, and he's in big trouble these days. He could be prosecuted one day and became a criminal, and he wants to send this person to jail. Probably he will send himself to jail one day. So unless you have the contextual assumptions to know about Donald Trump, otherwise you will completely misunderstand this sentence. And we also speak most of the time metaphorically. Time flies, it's a metaphor. Time cannot fly, so it's a metaphorical expression. And again, this is easy to understand. He drowned in the sea of a grave. Grave can't be a sea, so that's metaphorical. But sometimes metaphorical can be a less explicit. So they'd be thick as thieves. That doesn't mean they are stupid like thieves. That's not. Thick as thieves, it means that they get along so well. That means thick and thieves. So metaphorically also, again, is not does not mean what it says. Linguistically decoding. It's dangerous in many ways if you only do the linguistic decoding without the context. So these are the real examples. And again, as I said, once you become a well-trained translator, your world becomes so rich. You understand lots of things. And whatever people say, you have other things that they don't see. And this is a colleague of mine. She has two children. One is a younger boy and one is 5-year-old daughter, girl. So the boy was younger, 2 years old boy, and 5-year-old girl. So one day she was busy cooking. So she said to the daughter, keep the other way around. She said to her boy, keep an eye on your little sister. So, and when she came back, she saw her boy cover one eye. And so she said, what are you doing? And the boy said, you said, keep an eye on her. So I am keeping one eye on her. So that is a very literal in interpreting. And bring the plate is another very funny thing. I don't know the customer in Macau, but in Australia, there is a customer. Is when you are invited to your guest, you often say to them, bring the plate. And this happened to a student who first came to Australia. And her classmates said, oh, you know, we are having a party on Sunday. You can come and bring a plate. And she was wondering, why you want me to bring a plate? Don't you have enough plates? So she thought, oh, okay, they must not have enough plates. So she brought an empty plate to the party. And then her friends said, why you bring the plate? She said, you asked me to bring the plate. And then friend said, oh, in Australia, when we say bring a plate, we mean you bring a dish. So everyone bring a dish so we can have a party. Again, it's linguistic decoding without contextual information. When you are lacking contextual information, you completely misunderstood. And these two are innocent, but could be dangerous. So at this stage, we can definitely conclude expression is what is said, and intended message is what is meant. They are not the same thing. They often are not the same thing. So what is said often is not what is intended, as we just concluded. This is example. Have you submitted your assignment? I ask you, you know, being the students, you know, assignment is always a pressure. And you said, oh, the weather is really nice. It has stopped raining. Why are you saying this? Why didn't you answer my question? Or did you answer my question? You did. And why you did answer the question this way? It's because you don't want to talk about assignment. Because you haven't even started, even though it's going to be due in 2 days. So it's just something you hate to talk about. So that's why you change the subject. Oh, the weather is nice. So what? But it's not that you're interested in weather. And it's not that you didn't understand my question. You understood my question. You're deliberately talking about weather. And it's not that we are interested in weather. You could talk about sports as well. Basically, you just want to distract. You don't want to talk about it. Assignment. So you can see what is said. It's not what is meant. Communication isn't just an encoding, decoding process. Human communication is inferential. This is another example. We're talking about using the same thing. And, you know, even if we're talking about same language, refuse to admit them. What does it mean to you? It depends. If you made a mistake, and I tell you, what should I do when I make a mistake? Refuse to admit them. So don't admit your mistakes or deny it. That's my advice. Or if you are going to a music festival and you have the tickets, but your tickets have expired, and then the person asks, what should I do if their tickets have expired? And I tell you, refuse to allow them in. Deny their entrance. So admit them means do not let them in. So admit here can mean completely different things depending on the context. So contextual assumptions, you can see, is vital to the understanding of the intended message. And I also want you, again, to reverse thinking. So when you do the translation, you not only think of the linguistic expression, you also think, what is the contextual assumptions here that helped me to understand in Chinese? And when I translate it into English, what do I need to consider? Do I need to provide contextual assumptions that I have accessed in Chinese? Yes. So you need to reverse thinking. And this is a typical example of Chinese. And all the examples, it's my own example. And as I said, you know, I've done translation for the last 23 years. So this is what we say in Chinese. 你这是吃饱了撑的吧? So you can translate, you've had too much to eat. But is that what we meant in Chinese? And you know, Chinese, I always say to my friends, and my friends have that experience as well. Chinese never say that you've had too much to eat. Because my daughter, when She was born and grew up in Australia. And each time I brought her to China, and, Chinese people or friends and the families, they always ask him to eat more. And then one day she said, why they always tell me to eat more, so 多吃一点. So I said, Chinese people is very hospitable. They never say you've had too much to eat. And when do you say you've had too much to eat? You don't mean you've had too much to eat. You mean, don't you have anything better to do? So this comes from the film called 我不是潘金莲, I'm not 潘金莲. Is because I don't know whether you watch this film. If you watch this film, you know it is Li Xuelian, who is played by Fan Bingbing, and she was divorced fake, as a fake divorce so that they can get a house. But then her husband said, oh, no, we are truly divorced. So she was so angry. So she going around and to all sorts of places to tell people this is a fake divorce and this is not real divorce. And she's going everywhere. So in the end, this official said, 你这是吃饱了撑的吧? Don't you have anything better to do? Completely different. But do you get the meaning? Yes. So the way you translate is not a literary translation. If you do literary translation, you didn't do the translation correctly. So we can see what is said. It's not what is meant. And when this applies to translation, that double the trouble. So the other thing I want you to be aware is our cognition, our understanding, our perception are conditioned and restricted by our own cultural context. By being aware of that, you also need to be aware of your audience. This is what I meant at the very beginning, knowing your audience. You need to know their cognitive and cultural context because their understanding of your translation are conditioned and restricted by their cultural context. This is an example. 男人41枝花. You say, yeah, I know how to translate. Men at 40 are a flower. I mean, literally, it's not wrong. You translated what it says, literally. You translate it linguistically. So it's not wrong. But then you think of your English language audience. And then they say, why men at 40 are a flower? Why they are not a rock? Why they are not a tree? Why a man at 40 are a flower? So to understand men at 40 are a flower, it's actually you need a lot of contextual information. So contextual information you access in Chinese because we say 男人41枝花. We don't mean that 男人40是一朵花. We mean men at 40 because especially in the olden days, men at 40 is really oldish men. But 男人41枝花, we mean that they are still at their prime time. 是吧? 他们仍然还有很多的魅力，有很多的精力，所以我们说男人41枝花. This is actually what we call conventional or dead metaphor. 所以一枝花是一个 metaphor. 就是说他们像一枝花，并不是说他们就是一枝花。是一枝花和像一枝花是两回事。所以 when you understand Chinese, you have lots of contextual information. 你知道这是一个 metaphor. 你知道它是像一枝花，所以它像一枝花那样鲜艳，还有活力。但是你的 translation is a very literary translation. You didn't translate as a metaphor. And not only a flower, not like a flower, but also a flower in bloom, full bloom, 就是一个绽放的花，因为花 can be withered. So 它们也不是一个凋零的花。So that's very important, not just like a flower, but like a flower in full bloom. And that will make sense. So you can see the top and the bottom, they're completely different translation. But the bottom is perfect. It conveys what actually contextual information to help your target language audience to understand. And the top one is weird. They will say, oh, Chinese is really weird. Why they say man at 40 a flower? That's not what we meant in Chinese. We meant a man at 40 is like a flower in full bloom. And when now translating this, or the Australian audience in, my colleague said, oh, that's really nice to say. I like it, of course. So we can also say that a sameness in two languages does not exist, not even on what level. Really? That's right. No two languages are the same, not even on the what level. And there is no equivalence without difference. And equivalence is not replication. So translation is not about finding equivalence, because no equivalence without difference. And equivalence, as I said, is not replication. Very important to know. This is another example. You say, okay, 裸婚, I know it's a naked wedding, but 裸婚, Chinese 裸婚 is not the same as English naked wedding. Naked wedding means they are naked. And people who are at the wedding are not wearing any clothes. And this is really funny, because once I was invited to a Shanghai Film Festival, and then they are showing us all the films. And one of the films is called Naked Wedding. And the title came up, said, 裸婚, and then English translation, Naked Wedding. Oh my God. And I showed to my daughter. My daughter laughed. And my daughter said, oh, who wouldn't want to go to that wedding, seeing everyone is naked? So naked wedding means you are naked, but 裸婚 is not. 裸婚就是说你不要铺张浪费，你把你的婚姻那个结婚仪式弄得最 minimum， 就叫裸婚。所以这个裸 is not naked， 裸有很多的意思。So in these circumstances, 裸 is basically is no frills. No frills means no extravagance. It's a very basic. Very, like if you're in the market and some brand 就是有些那个没有包装的，就是包装最简陋的那些产品就叫 no frills. So it's no frills wedding. It's a very different from naked wedding. So that's the danger of you think the language are the same. They are not the same. And another example, we say 内八字 and 外八字. So you can't just say outward 8 or inward 8, because 8 in English is not outward or inward. So that doesn't match. However, every language has its own expression. So outward is duck feet, and inward 八字叫内八字 is pigeon toes. And then there is a difference to the image, because when we say 外八字和内八字, we don't think it's funny. We just describe them very objectively, like outside, like inward. So there is nothing image. There is no image that make you feel like, oh, it's funny. But when you see it in English, it becomes funny. So you have the picture in your head, with duck feet and the pigeonholes. So even if we express the same thing, same position, and the words give us different pictures, and the words give us a different effect and different impact on our mind. When you see duck feet, you feel like it's funny. When you just say 外八字, you don't think it's funny. So that is very, very important for you to be aware. This is another example. 备胎, you know 备胎. 备胎 in English and in Chinese both means the same thing, spare time. It's really the same thing. However, both English and Chinese have extended meaning. And you probably know the Chinese extended meaning. There is also an English extended meaning. What does that mean? So when you see someone has a spare tire in English, that means they are fat because they carry a lot of fat around their waist. It's like you're carrying a spare tire. So that's extended meaning. So when you see someone has a spare tire, it means they are very fat. So you don't say that word, easily. But in Chinese, we also have extended meaning, and that doesn't mean you carry a extra load of fat. it means backup, girlfriend or boyfriend. So even if we have the same meaning, the original meaning, but when we have extended meaning, we mean completely different things. And I had a test with my colleagues. So we did a lecture, and the catchline is, have a guess. What does it mean, spare tire in Chinese, in Mandarin? And no one guessed it. Is a backup, a boyfriend, a girlfriend. When they know it, and they said, oh, of course, it makes perfect sense. It's so funny. So no two languages are the same. And when we do the translation, we need to do manipulation, because negotiation, the mediation, and for you to make a best possible decision to arrive communication, you need to be able to manipulate. Manipulating translation doesn't mean distorting. It's not. As I said, mediation, you need to do a lot of massage, maneuvering. So that's called a manipulation. So manipulation in translation is not a bad word. And this is a very good example. This is from 非诚勿扰, if you're the one. And this girl, I don't know whether you have watched 非诚勿扰. I hope you have. It's very funny. It's so popular in Australia. And I translated about 400 episodes of If You're the One. Many people know about me in Australia, quite famous, is because I've done the translation of If You're the One. And If You're the One is the most popular non-English drama or TV series in Australia. It has been shown for 7 years consecutively. Every single day there is an episode. It's incredible. And why people like it? It's a through translation. So that's how I got my reputation up. It's purely through subtitles, because there is no story, So anyway, so this there are 24 girls and 1 boy. So, and this boy came up and he said, oh, I love martial arts fictions. I've read every single book about martial arts. And this girl, she's very clever. She always asks leading questions to test whether the boy is smart or dumb. So she said, oh, since you have read so much martial arts fiction, let me ask you a question. 你要是从悬崖上跳下来会怎么样? Yeah, if you had to jump off a cliff, what do you think would happen? If you are a smart boy, you would say, oh, 我会飞檐走壁啊, 我会 play all the tricks 呀. But if you're a dumb boy, like this one, and he said, oh, 那我可能被树挂住了. Oh, 那我也可能会摔死了. So I'd be caught by a tree, or I might stew down. So it's not funny at all. So it's a very anticlimax, because people were waiting for him to say, or, 飞檐走壁, no thoughts. So he just said, oh, I'd be caught by a tree. 我可能就被树挂住了，也许会死。这个时候就孟非 is a very funny person, and he is very well known in Australia because of his sense of humor. And obviously sense of humor is a through translation. So anyway, so he said, 你要没挂住就挂了. Everyone laughed in the audience. And this is another lecture that I will have to do for you later on about translator for audience, for live audience, for the studio audience. Anyway, because they laugh, you need to make your Australian audience laugh as well, or at least to understand why they laugh. So 他说你要没挂住就挂了. Everyone laughed. And then I thought, oh my God, this is really funny, but what should I do? Because as we know, we can, if you translate as what is said, or as it meant, you should, oh, if you weren't caught, you'd be dead. But you basically repeat what he just said himself. 他刚才不是说了吗？我要没挂住，我可能也会死了. So basically, Meng Fei repeated what he said, and that doesn't explain why it's funny. It's not funny at all. The funny bits is because 挂呢挂，两个挂，第一个挂呢是 being caught， 是不是挂住了？第二个挂是一个 slang word, meaning you die， 没挂你就挂了嘛，你这个人死了就是挂了。That is why it's so funny. So that also shows Meng Fei's quick wit. He's a really witty person. So it took me a while, and then I thought of this. If you missed, you'd be missed. So the first miss is you missed it. 你没抓住嘛，你就掉下去了。You will be missed means we will miss you because you are dead. So to miss, that explains. And that catches the humor instantly. So it was really good. And my editor said, oh, it's really good. And he's so funny. I said, well, that's what I said. That's not what he said, although he said in a different way. And this is another example. And 用人不疑，疑人不用. So you can say if you employ someone, trust him. If you don't trust him, don't employ him. That's perfectly fine. It says what it meant. It says what is meant. But the thing is, the wisdom of Chinese is because they use 4 characters, same characters, just changing the order, and the meaning is different. So that's the trick. Form and meaning, 形式和内容都非常非常的有智慧. That shows the Chinese wisdom. So if you translate like this, you don't really show much of a wisdom. So this is what I did. Appoint those you trust. Trust those you appoint. 4 same characters. You just change your order. The meaning changed completely. And when I showed this to my boss, oh, he loved it. He said, oh, that's so wise. It is. They are the wisdom of words and Chinese wisdom. Appoint those you trust and trust those you appoint. So that's called manipulation, because you cannot just translate as literally. And this is very tricky. As you know, 孟非没有头发，所以这个女嘉宾胆子特别大，什么话都敢说。她那天就在那调侃孟非，说：“哦，孟老师，你是我见过的最无法无天的那个，你是我见过的最有意思的光头，最聪明的光头，无法无天。”然后 everyone laughed。那这个无法无天，它是这个意思嘛？就无法无天。But without hair and the law, it's nothing to do in English. You just cannot have them together. But it's important, the thing here, and I show you. So, you are the coolest body I've ever met, and you are the boldest. So I rhymed the body and the boldest. Body 就是光头嘛。有没有大家知道他在调侃孟非，然后 boldest 嘛，你胆子最大嘛，你什么都敢做，就无法无天。So I rhymed the body with the boldest, and that's equally funny as 无法无天. So that requires manipulation. And this is another one, and often mainland Chinese say this. I don't know whether people in Macau or students here understand. 老司机 doesn't mean old driver. Old driver means you are senior. You are just old in age. Means nothing else. 但是老司机 in this slang words, in young people's words, means that you are very experienced, especially in dating. So this guy came up and he said, oh, I've had 6 or 7 past relations. Oh, everyone said, oh. And this girl said, oh, 我不喜欢老司机. So you can't say, I don't like an older driver. So you say, I don't like dating an old hand. 是不是啊？你这个老手我不喜欢 date. 但是呢 that's only one step, because this guy is truly an old hand. 那是个老司机。他说，可我连驾照都没有。So you can't say, oh, I don't like dating an old hand. And then he said, oh, I don't even have a license. So that doesn't make sense. So you have to think what he replied that also matches what you have just translated. So I don't like dating an old hand. Actually, I'm not that old. So I'm not that old means I'm not that old in age, but it also means I'm not that experienced. Because he said old hand. So he is picking on the old. So that is equally funny. And again, this requires a lot of manipulation. So intrinsic ambiguity and elasticity, I just mentioned, all utterances are ambiguous. and they are very elastic. And 这个是拿人手短，拿人手短 basically it means, so Chinese are so concise. Again, if I talk about specifically talking about subtitling requirements or subtitling constraints, Chinese are very difficult to be translated into English for all sorts of reasons. One of them is very concise. And again, I need to give you a different lecture on that. So basically, 拿人手短 means if you take someone's gift, you will feel obliged to do something against your will, your own will, even break the law. So that's why 拿人手短. So it's not like by taking someone's gift, your hand becomes short. It's just like you are obliged, even if you don't want it. So that's what we mean by 拿人手短. And then you think how you're going to translate into English, not without being so wordy. Gifts trap you. Trap is vital. So when you are trapped, you can't get out. So this is a key word. And that's what I mean, is by thoroughly understanding the source language, the source text. You cover every aspect, every single bit of that space. Then you think, how I'm going to say that in English to make my English language people understand the Chinese words or Chinese saying. 小别胜新婚, you think, oh, I can see it. A short break is better than being newly married. There is a problem. 小别胜新婚 doesn't mean better or worse. You can't really say a short break is better than being newly married. Why is it better? 所以胜 is not always better. In this context, we are not talking about better or worse, because being newly married can be equally good. Why has to be worse? No, there is no logic there. And that's not meant in Chinese. We don't say that, 新婚都很糟糕. That's not true. So 胜新婚 is not better in this way. Another word is sweeter. That make a difference. A short break makes the relationship sweeter. So it's, again, manipulation, understanding, and interpretation all involved. Culture challenges is very important. So culture challenge, there is a person who I love his book. It's called The Poetics of Translation by Will Bunston. And this is a very old book, but some of the saying is to make perfect sense. Why you need to study translation theories. And I know because many of my students who came from China, they said, we study lots of translation theories and we never know what's the point. Translation theory is important if it explains, it gives you the explanatory power of the process. So it tells you why. So that theory is useful. And the understanding of theory on that level will be very useful. And you can see I benefit heaps from the theory because that lifts you up beyond just doing practice. If you do not understand why, you do millions of translation practice, it'll make no difference at the end. So Bunston said, the reason why we can't find a word in the target language, because the target language doesn't have that experience to give birth of that word. That explains all. Don't you love it? Oh, I thought, gosh, that explains. That's why you cannot find that word in the target language. It's because target language doesn't have that cultural experience. When you do not have the experience, you don't have the word for it. You see, really? Yeah. Sajo is typical one. And Sajo is a concept that doesn't exist in Western culture. Really? That's right. And then when I explained, you think about Sajo. Sajo is basically adults. We see Sajo, we refer to adults. We don't see children's 撒娇, we see adults, often girls, sometimes the boys as well. Basically, you're adults, and then you want to get your things, but you can't get what you want. So you started stamping your feet, or you speak in a very babyish way, or you do something like as a child, basically, to get the attention, to get what you want. From your boyfriend, from your partner, from your dad, or from your uncle, whoever. So that's called 撒娇，对不对？ And you think, oh, in English, must have it. So I have 2 children, my boy and my girl. My boy is bigger and older than my daughter. So I said, oh, I'm going to ask my children. Maybe they know. I can't think of an English word for it. So I explained to my boy, Samuel. I said, Samuel, this is what the girl does when the 撒娇 refers to. They do this and that. So Samuel said, grow up. So I said, oh, no, that's not what 撒娇 means. I need to ask my daughter. You don't understand us, boy. So ask my daughter. My daughter said, stop being a baby. So true. It is. It's basically, it's like a baby behavior. So depends on the circumstances. The 撒娇 means different things. So you do not have a set of words for 撒娇. So in these circumstances, this girl, she said, oh, 我要就是撒娇无底线，我要让我的男朋友我给他打电话，他秒接，我要让他做什么，他马上要做，要不然怎么样。所以他就说我撒娇无底线。So she'd say and do anything to get her attention. That's what he meant. That is what is meant here, 撒娇. Then this girl, she didn't get the boy that she wanted because the boy picked a different girl. So she got really upset and she started stamping her feet on the stage. 她就在那个台上开始跺脚。然后黄磊 as a guest 就说，哦，你不要在这个台上撒娇。That means stop being a baby. 然后那个黄磊其实还说了一个这个，我就没有放在这里边。I'll give you another example. 那个是比较 obvious. 这个你说景阳打过虎，这个是武松，这也是那个我不是潘金莲里面的。你说在景阳打过虎，你说呀，我知道 I fought a tiger in Jing Hill. First of all, what does that mean? It doesn't mean much to the English-speaking people. Why? Why he goes to Jing? What is Jingyang Hill? So Jingyang itself doesn't make any sense to the English-speaking people. You lose it on them. Secondly, it's not just a fought a tiger. 武松在景阳打过虎是什么意思？武松在景阳不是打过虎，是 killed the tiger. 怎么 killed 的？赤手空拳。所以在景阳打过虎，他说这个话的意思是 he once killed a tiger with his bare hands. That's very different, the top from the bottom, because that gives you the impression of who Wu Song is. Send a chill over your spine. If this person can kill a tiger with his bare hands, he could have killed anyone. So that's the most important from cultural perspective. Lastly, I just want to give a couple of examples about humor, because humor is most difficult to translate. And I have to tell you, translating humor is especially in subtitling. You are not allowed to substitute. I know in China, they often substitute humor, jokes, to make people laugh. No. In subtitling or in translation in general, you should never substitute, because that's a cheating. And that's misleading your audience. You make them believe that is what is said. That's not true. And in subtitling, you can never do that. Again, I have to give you another lecture about subtitling, because subtitling is transparent. Many people understand the source language, so you cannot make up. So that's very important. So no, there is no substitute. 你不能说哦，我让他们笑，我就换一个笑话。我其实看到国内有时候翻的时候，把那个小沈阳呀、什么郭德纲啊都放到美剧里边去，that's not possible.
That's ludicrous, actually. That's not translation. So 这个姑娘呢，特别爱那个就 showing off。每次大家说一个什么时候，她就说哦，我知道这个我做过，这个。哎呀，孟非那个人比较 kind， 他就不太他能看出来，但是他不想让太驳这个姑娘的面子，所以他就那样比较婉转的说了。然后呢，那个姑娘又说了一句：“哎呀，我什么什么都知道。”然后呢，孟非就说：“你怎么什么都知道啊？”他就说：“我是过来人了。”然后孟非就说：“你打哪儿过来啊？怎么就成过来人了？” So it's actually quite funny play on the 过来人。So you translate, oh, I've come through. Oh, where did you come through? How did you come through? That make absolutely no sense. It's not funny at all. It's just not right. And then you think, 过来人是什么意思？你知道 in English, we have a word saying, been there, done that. And for people who kind of have experience but a little bit of boasting. For example, 你跟我说，哦，你说韩老师你怎么不去申请校长的工作啊？我说哦 ，I've been there, done that， 是有一点吹牛的成分在里的啊，那些东西我都经历过了，不在乎了。所以有一点吹牛的东西就叫 been there and done that。那你知道我为什么要选 been there and done that？ 这个姑娘说了 ，I've been there and done that。The reason why I do this is because I want the second Meng Fei's words. So I've been there and done that. And then Meng Fei said, where have you been and what have you done? And that corresponding, and that's really funny, but not too harsh, because Meng Fei didn't mean in a harsh way, in a very mean way, not. So it's actually quite clever, but quite clear that he didn't agree with her. Last one, example, joke. This is very tricky. 吃黄豆了吗? Anyone knows what does it mean? 这个就是那个 context 是这样的。那个在这一期里边是那个刘烨是嘉宾。然后来了一个男嘉宾上台，他就给大家每个人都发了一个那个陕西出土的那个最早的乐器叫埙，就是一个泥做的那样的埙，然后吹很难吹响，然后每个人都放在嘴上试，就吹不响，最后刘烨放在嘴上噗这样一个声音，然后孟非说刘烨会吹，让刘烨吹。然后刘烨就出那个音响师就故意把那个声音放大，不那样。然后孟非就说：“吃黄豆了吧 ？”Everyone laughed， 因为我们知道吃黄豆有个 consequence， 是不是？哎，对，他的意思就是放屁了。所以吃黄豆在这里，你要说 Did you eat soybeans？ 肯定不可以 ，No one would understand。但是你说 Did you fart？That's also not right， 因为孟非没有说 Did you fart？And also this is on TV， this is a dating show， 他们都在找朋友相亲这个节目，国家电视台里边他不会说你放屁了吧，多不文雅，而且 he didn't say that。So you cannot put words into his mouth. He didn't say it. So you cannot say Did you fart？What can you say? In a subtle way, an upset stomach. So when you have an upset stomach, two things will happen. Either you make sound, you know, 咕咕咕的声音，特别是开会的时候，你肚子一叫，哎呀，那特别不好意思，或者你就放屁了。So in a subtle way. So you can see that my ways are still linked to what happened. So it's not far-fetched. I didn't make up. I didn't go for another joke. So we can conclude translation is not a mirror. Translation text becomes a new text. And this new text has a life of its own. It opens up new ways of seeing the original text. That also explains in the Australian audience, they see Inferred One, 他们看非诚勿扰 very different from Chinese audience. 所以他们特别喜欢非诚勿扰，因为他们看到很多他们在平时看不到关于中国的事情。那中国的观众说啊，这不就个娱乐节目有什么东西
对澳大利亚人来讲，这个是绝对文化的一个东西，太多的文化成分在里边，他们看到了太多的中国社会文化生活里边的东西，所以it's very interesting. English translation opened up new ways of looking at this Chinese show. That's the end of my lecture, and I hope you've learned something.